Tonight on WIN, Friends, then suddenly Susan. At 8:30, the superb new Aussie drama, Murder Call, followed by Monday Night Football.
This morning on Daybreak, Bruce Burrell denies any involvement in the Kerry Whelan kidnapping. Federal Parliament resumes today with tax reform top of the agenda, and Michael Schumacher wins the Belgian Grand Prix.
From National 9 News, this is Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Kim Watkins, filling in for Sharon, who's taking a very well-earned break. Bruce Burrell, the man whose property was searched by police investigating the kidnapping of Sydney mother Kerry Whelan, says it's simply freakish that he knows two women who have vanished without trace in the past 2 years. Mr Burrell has also told Channel 9's 60 Minutes that he met with Mrs Whelan before she went missing, but denies any involvement in her abduction.
Bruce Burrell says he's a victim of circumstance, that he knew two women who happened to mysteriously vanish without trace.
Absolutely. Freakish, without doubt. But yes, I knew both women. But apart from that, there's nothing more to it.
Since mother of three, Kerry Whelan, was abducted in May, police have searched Mr Burrell's property near Goulburn. He was a former employee of Mrs Whelan's husband. Mr Burrell was also a family friend of Dorothy Davies. The wealthy widow disappeared in May 1995.
Would you concede that it doesn't look good?
Oh, I don't know if it looks... It doesn't look good without doubt. But because I've known them, doesn't mean I've had an involvement.
Task Force detectives investigating the disappearance of both women described Bruce Burrell as a person of interest. Late last week, they executed a search warrant on the offices of 60 Minutes. Meanwhile, Mr Burrell has told a Sydney newspaper he's now terrified after an incident last Thursday morning. He reported to Goulburn police a car ran him off the road as he drove near his property. Mr Burrell says he was left badly shaken. Damien Ryan, National 9 News.
Federal Parliament resumes today after the 2-month winter recess, and one of the big issues is certain to be the government's tax reform agenda, including the planned introduction of a goods and services tax. On that front, Treasurer Peter Costello has confirmed that income tax cuts will only come if the GST is allowed to go ahead.
Recent opinion polls show a turnaround in voter support for a GST. One survey indicating 45% of Australians are now in favour of a goods and services tax. That's pleased Treasurer Peter Costello, who confirmed personal tax cuts and a GST will go hand in hand.
This is a package which is not going to be split up in any way. It's got to be indirect tax, it's got to be income tax.
But Mr Costello dismissed a report the government may introduce income tax cuts before the next election.
Our tax policy is going to be put down before the next election and implemented after.
While Labor continues its campaign against a GST, opposition leader Kim Beazley has backed away from including that position in ALP policy.
I'm not sure that we ever get that specific on tax in policy statements ever in the past. And I doubt whether we'd get that specific on tax in the future.
The government and the opposition are also preparing for another clash over native title and the Constitutional Convention when Parliament resumes again this week after a 2-month break. Flo Bitcon, National 9 News.
Less than a week after the ACT's heroin trial was vetoed by federal cabinet, New South Wales Premier Bob Carr has called for a national summit on Australia's drug crisis. He's written to Prime Minister Howard telling him that national action is needed to help stop the growing death toll from drug abuse.
According to the Premier, heroin has never been easier to get.
A hit of heroin is now cheaper than a slab of beer, and that is one of the factors fueling our concern that's flooding into the country.
In the wake of last week's federal cabinet decision to scrap a proposed heroin trial in the ACT, Mr Carr is calling for a national drug summit. Health and police ministers are already meeting in November, The Premier says if state leaders were there too, a boost to customs funding to stem the flow of heroin and a national anti-drug advertising campaign could also be discussed. He has written to the Prime Minister with his suggestions.
I haven't a response yet. I think he would be supportive.
But the Prime Minister's office says Mr Howard is yet to be convinced of the benefits of a summit, but is keeping an open mind. Support for the Premier's plan has come from many quarters.
There is no question we need a national forum.
I welcome any initiative that helps to save lives.
Even the Salvation Army, one of the biggest opponents of the ACT plan, is cautiously backing the Carr initiative.
We need to be right on his back and make sure that it's more than just words, that he puts them into action.
But drug users are sceptical.
They don't use, they don't know.
Come and talk one-on-one, or to a group of people that have done it and been there.
Shari Armistead, National 9 News.
Pauline Hanson has been targeted at a Melbourne rally against racism. Speakers attacked the controversial independent MP and her latest views on immigration and religion.
The temperature may have been chilly, but the topic was anything but, as one guest speaker after another denounced the rising tide of racism many feel is flooding Australia.
For things to grow, something has to die. And our old ways, our old beliefs, they have to die.
As expected, Pauline Hanson was a prime target of protesters. A former Premier blaming governments for allowing the sort of fear that encourages racism.
That's what that woman is relying upon, and those who are winding her up are relying upon. The fear that they can create.
Her way and her system and her ideology is completely wrong.
By bringing in a diversity of religion, we can all have peace and we can all practice our religions much more safely and much more effectively.
But she's far from Adolf Hitler. She's not as clever as Adolf Hitler was.
The federal government labelled the idea of religious screening as reprehensible.
Well, it sounds as if she's becoming even more extreme.
But One Nation was quick to defend its leader, claiming she was simply talking about the Christian basis of Australian laws.
All that we ask is if you come to Australia, you will be judged under Australian law. Do not bring the difficulties from your country.
Wayne Dyer, National 9 News.
Police in Melbourne will return to a house in the inner city suburb of Brunswick this morning after the discovery of 2 human skulls in the backyard. They were found by a resident who was gardening late yesterday. The property has been sealed off so detailed forensic tests can be carried out. It's believed the entire backyard will be excavated later today as police search for more remains. 2 men will appear in a Sydney court this morning, charged over an 8-hour siege at Bankstown in the city's west. The brothers, aged 21 and 23, allegedly barricaded themselves in a garage at a block of home units. They eventually gave themselves up after police forced their way in. An Australian yachtsman has described an horrific attack which left him with 200 stitches in his neck. Alan McCarriger was helping a man in trouble off Papua New Guinea when he was slashed with a machete.
Recovering in Port Moresby Hospital, Alan McCarriger looked nothing like a man who'd come so close to death. A narrow bandage concealing 200 stitches, the legacy of a machete attack which cut him from ear to ear.
I was quite conscious of the fact that blood loss was my major problem. I stemmed the bleeding as much as possible with towels.
McCarriger had anchored his 10-metre catamaran Calypso 2 in Milne Bay on Thursday when he received an unexpected visitor.
He was in a sunken canoe. I helped him empty his canoe and then he lunged at me and he cut my throat.
His attacker left him for dead.
I was fortunate there was another boat nearby, an inter-island ferry, and they took me to shore. I made my way to hospital.
The 200 stitches were inserted while Mr McCarriger was fully conscious. He was then airlifted by an RAAF Hercules to Port Moresby. Despite his ordeal, Alan McCarriger says this trip won't be his last.
I'm quite well. In a few days I'll be up and raging, no problem.
Paul Murphy, National 9 News.
In finance news, our dollar is starting the week around 74 3/4 US cents. Wall Street finished down 6 points on the Dow Jones Index. Gold put on $2.10 and oil 1 cent. And Michael Pascoe will have more business news later in the bulletin. Looking at weather around Australia, showers in Adelaide, Melbourne and Hobart, windy in Canberra and Sydney and fine in other capitals. And still ahead on Daybreak, the Pope preaches to 1 million faithful in Paris and air show action in Queensland. You're with Daybreak, and making headlines this morning, Bruce Burrell, the man questioned over the kidnapping of Kerry Whelan, has told Channel 9's 60 Minutes that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Federal Parliament resumes today after a 2-month winter recess, with one of the big issues certain to be the government's tax reform agenda, including the planned introduction of a GST. And less than a week after the ACT's heroin trial was vetoed by federal cabinet, New South Wales Premier Bob Carr has called for a national summit on Australia's drug crisis. The Victorian government is being urged to reconsider the future of Melbourne's Essendon Airport after a council decision to sell off the complex next year. Nearby residents are also being asked to support a council campaign for another review of the airport's safety and viability.
The City of Moonee Valley says the decision to sell off the freehold of Essendon Airport effectively hands planning control back to the state government. To make the sale more attractive, Canberra has asked for a covenant on the land to ensure it remains an airport. The council says that gives Premier Jeff Kennett a unique opportunity to reconsider the future of the complex.
He is on record a number of times of saying that he does favour closure, and he really does say that because of the safety factors.
Airport operators say they expect approval of the planning amendment, and they've dismissed calls for another review of the site.
The arguments have all been put up before. They've all been discarded in the end. The airport is safe.
But opponents claim the federal government has failed to release all information to potential buyers.
They're trying to unload an unsafe airport onto unsuspecting bidders.
The airport is expected to be sold by next June. Sally Pickering, National 9 News.
Pope John Paul has wound up his trip to Paris with an open-air mass before more than 1 million people. The 77-year-old pontiff braved sweltering conditions to address young worshippers from around the world attending a 6-day Roman Catholic festival. The Pope made a final parade through the French capital, possibly his last trip to the city. Some of our most formidable aircraft have performed at a centennial tribute to our most famous flyer, Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. About 60,000 people attended the show at Caboolture, north of Brisbane.
The crowds were promised heart-stopping, adrenaline-pumping action, and that's exactly what they got. The program began with the arrival of the Southern Cross replica, Smithy's old bus. Thousands came to marvel at the miracles of modern aviation from every vantage point. And there were many old-time favourites as well.
I'd like to hear the sound of all the grunt machines. It's just a wonderful opportunity to see some of the aircraft that you don't normally see in one place at one time.
There's also some extremely rare planes here. This Boomerang is the only one flying in the world today.
It's a hell of a buzz. The feeling you get, if you're really on a good day, the aeroplane isn't an aeroplane, it becomes part of yourself.
One moonstruck pilot had stars in his eyes. The answer was yes.
I think for an aeroplane to sit there and hover like a helicopter, it amazes people.
In Caboolture, Tracy Rankin, National 9 News.
And coming up on Today, training horses by using their body language. But Daybreak Sport is next, and Michael Schumacher extends his lead in the Drivers' Championship. Aussie Pat Rafter has been defeated in the final of the ATP tournament in New York, going down to 5th-seeded Spaniard Carlos Moya in straight sets. Rafter hasn't won a final in 5 attempts this year, unforced errors costing him dearly. Moya won the match in a second-set tiebreaker. Greg Norman has a one-shot lead with only a handful of holes to play in the World Championship of Golf in Ohio. He leads American left-hander and defending champion Phil Mickelson. This is the putt that put Norman into the lead a short time ago.
Oh, yes. Greg Norman breaks out of a 3-way tie to take sole possession of the lead at -5.
Michael Schumacher has taken another step towards his 3rd World Drivers' Championship, winning the Belgian Grand Prix overnight. The German finished well clear of Italian Giancarlo Fisichella. McLaren's Mika Häkkinen came in third.
Pouring rain at Spa meant the race started behind a safety car until the track was dry enough for top speed.
Because these Formula One cars do not like going slow.
Nor does Michael Schumacher, and when the race began in earnest, he quickly moved to second. Then, on the very next lap, the German blew past Villeneuve.
And he's going up the inside of Villeneuve now. Beautiful move.
His brother Ralph wasn't handling the conditions nearly so well.
Made a right mess of that, hasn't he?
While Jos Verstappen was also claimed by the slippery Belgian circuit. Out in front, though, Michael Schumacher's performance had his pit crew completely relaxed.
Wake up, that man. Ferrari mechanic going to sleep with Michael Schumacher leading the race.
Jacques Villeneuve struggled all day, but late in the race salvaged one championship point, getting past Alesi. Schumacher, however, now leads the world title race by 12 points, finishing 27 seconds clear of Fisichella. Chris Hodgkinson, National 9 News.
Now for the national weather, showers in Adelaide, Melbourne and Hobart, windy in Canberra and Sydney and fine in the other capitals. Next on Daybreak, Michael Pascoe joins us for Finance News. Welcome back to Daybreak on Monday the 25th of August. This morning, Bruce Burrell, the man questioned over the kidnapping of Kerry Whelan, has told Channel 9's 60 Minutes that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. And federal parliament resumes today after a 2-month winter recess, with one of the big issues certain to be the government's tax reform agenda, including the planned introduction of a GST. Now for all the day's finance news, and we're joined by Michael Pascoe.
Thanks, Kim. This morning, the volatility of Wall Street keeping all the world's markets on their toes, while domestically, the IT industry joins the pleas for tax breaks. Big finance story around the globe, though, is what the hell is Wall Street up to? The New York Stock Exchange capped a remarkable week's trading with an extraordinary last half hour on Saturday morning. After the previous weekend's 247-point loss, the Dow Index rallied more than 100 points for 3 days in a row, then dived more than 100 on Thursday night, leaving the jury really wondering about Friday night's session. Well, it began dreadfully. The Dow off 177 at one stage, and it stayed down, being off 122 half an hour before the close. But in that half hour, the buyers came back and it finished just 6 points down. And such volatility and what it might mean has been the focus of much Wall Street comment, such as that of Jim Melcher, founder of Ballistra Capital, when he was interviewed on CNN's Moneyline.
Volatility is nerve-wracking, but stocks aren't really down that much. Some of the big ones are down maybe 10 or 15%, but look at the run they've had. So people who have done well, but it's clear they're in very seriously overpriced stocks.
Another interesting twist right now, in fact, later in the week, we saw the dollar go down 3 pfennigs, and that was enough to knock the legs underneath the bond market. But the dollar was moving up so high for 8-9 months that 3 pfennigs is really nothing. But that was enough to start a bit of a panic.
Well, obviously, the market is looking for an excuse to pull back here. It's overreached itself. It's run way on beyond where it should for the level of earnings that the S&P is generating. I mean, you've rarely seen a PE ratio this high. You did in 1987, just before the crash. Of course, at that point, interest rates are rising, and now they're not. But on most bases, the Standard & Poor's is seriously overvalued. Price to book, price to dividend, we've never been in this territory before in our whole history. On PE ratio, it's very high. So on most measures, you're in dangerous territory. Ironically, though, the rest of the market looks pretty good.
Cycon futures players took heart from the Wall Street comeback and lifted the share price index 17 points, despite the bills and bonds dropping 4 or so. US dollar improved a bit over the weekend, up to 118.25 on the yen. Our dollar's trading around 74.75 US cents to start the week, improving on the cross rates with the greenback, such as regaining the 88 yen level, if I can say it. Gold's put on $2.10 and silver's up 15 cents. Oil as good as steady, just down 1 cent on Saturday morning. US interest rates remained weak, the yield on the long bond rising to 6.65%. And that was no doubt a factor at the Dow. The Wall Street's finish off 6 points, as we said. The S&P down 1.5. The Dow was up 7 points for the week, though. The S&P ahead 22, with leading US funds manager Peter Lynch preaching good research and staying calm.
All I know is the market goes down, good stocks go down, bad stock goes down. I just try and say, what's the company I'm doing? If I like this company and it goes from 8 to 4, if I know what they do and I know they have a good balance sheet, I'm not getting shaken out. If I don't have any idea what this company does, I don't know what software is, if I don't know what networking is, if I don't know what a LAN is from a WAN, from a SHMAN, what do I do when the stock goes down? Do I flip a coin? Do I walk around the block? Do I call somebody on a psychic hotline? I mean, what do you do? If you don't understand the story, you're going to get beaten up.
Always a chance of that. And the London market earlier on lost 77 points very nearly. And it's back to you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Michael. And coming up on Today, a rural industry protests in Canberra as Parliament resumes. But that's Daybreak for this Monday. I'm Kim Watkins. Join me again at the same time tomorrow morning. Until then, enjoy your day. This morning on Daybreak, Bruce Burrell denies any involvement in the Kerry Whelan kidnapping. Federal Parliament resumes today with tax reform top of the agenda, and Michael Schumacher wins the Belgian Grand Prix.
From National 9 News, this is Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Kim Watkins, filling in for Sharon, who's taking a...
Bruce Burrell says he's a victim of circumstance, that he knew two women who happened to mysteriously vanish without trace.
Absolutely. Freakish, without doubt. But yes, I knew both women. But apart from that, there's nothing more to it.
Since mother of three, Kerry Whelan, was abducted in May, police have searched Mr Burrell's property near...
Very well-earned break. Bruce Burrell, the man whose property was searched by police investigating the kidnapping of Sydney mother Kerry Whelan, says it's simply freakish that he knows two women who have vanished without trace in the past 2 years. Mr Burrell has also told Channel 9's 60 Minutes that he met with Mrs Whelan before she went missing, but denies any involvement in her abduction.
Goulburn. He was a former employee of Mrs Whelan's husband. Mr Burrell was also a family friend of Dorothy Davies. The wealthy widow disappeared in May 1995.
Would you concede that it doesn't look good?
Oh, I don't know if it looks... It doesn't look good without doubt. But because I've known them, doesn't mean I've had an involvement.
Tonight on WIN, Friends, then Suddenly Susan. At 8:30, the superb new Aussie drama, Murder Call, followed by Monday Night Football.